Okay, so Lee and Grant were the adversaries. Lee just ended. Final 52 minutes. We're going to break it into 13-minute videos. So we'll do 4 of them, and then I'm done for the day. I will have done 13 videos today. So, and still put in a half day's work at work. So let's get done with this. It's 41:17 in case anyone cares.
The man known to history as Ulysses S. Grant was born as Hiram Ulysses Grant on the 27th of April 1822 in Point Pleasant, a small rural community in the southwest of the relatively young state of Ohio. His father was Jesse Root Grant, a farmer, tanner, and leather merchant who hailed originally from Pennsylvania, and who could trace his ancestry in America back to the first establishment of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. Jesse had moved westwards along with so many Americans in the early 19th century in search of new opportunities as the United States expanded from the east coast of North America. Ulysses' mother was Hannah Grant, originally Hannah Simpson. Her ancestry lay amongst the Presbyterian Scots, who had moved from Scotland to Ulster in the north of Ireland during the 17th century, and then emigrated again in great numbers from Ireland to North America in the course of the 18th century. She had married Jesse Grant in 1821, and Ulysses was their first child. She was a deeply religious woman, and Ulysses is believed to have taken after his mother more than his father, although he might well have acquired his anti-slavery stance from Jesse, who was a proclaimed abolitionist, meaning that he wished for slavery to be brought to an end throughout the United States. Ulysses would grow up in a large household, as he had 5 siblings: Simpson, Clara, Orville, Jenny, and Mary. The family was well enough off that Ulysses was provided with a substantial education at numerous private schools. This included a stint at the Rankin Academy in 1838. This was run by John Rankin, a noted abolitionist and educator who was prominent in running the Underground Railroad at the time. This was a system of safe houses and transport networks which abolitionists in America used to help escape slaves in the southern states of America to flee from slavery. Grant was growing up at a time when the United States was expanding swiftly, having largely been confined to a series of states along the eastern seaboard of North America in the 18th century. American eyes were turning west from 1800 onwards, with expansion towards the Great Lakes in the north and westwards towards the Mississippi River and the border with Spain's colonial possessions in Texas, New Mexico, and California. Beyond this territorial expansion, the social fabric of the country was shifting dramatically. Under British rule, slavery had been practiced throughout the colonies, though it was engaged in to a much greater extent in the southern colonies of Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia, with their sprawling cotton and tobacco plantations. Change was on the way though, as by 1800 a number of northern states, including New York, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts, inspired by the abolitionist movement, had banned slavery. By the time of Grant's birth, others, such as New Jersey, had become free states, while the period of his youth and adolescence saw the states directly to the west, such as Illinois and Michigan, follow their more liberal neighbors to the east. But the southern states remained unswerving in their defense of the institution of slavery, and so the stage was already being set during Grant's youth for a titanic struggle between the northern and southern states. Ultimately, Ulysses would find himself foisted into the conflicts of American society in the mid-19th century, owing to a decision made by his father in 1839. At this time, when Ulysses was still just 17, his father requested an acquaintance to nominate his son to the United States Military Academy at West Point in the state of New York, then, as now, the leading military academy in the United States. The application was successful, though, owing to an error in his registration, Hiram Ulysses Grant was recorded as Cadet Ulysses S. Grant on entry. This new name stuck. Grant was initially skeptical about life at West Point, but he eventually grew into it, acquiring a reputation while there for his equestrian skills, though, more broadly, he was only an average pupil. When he graduated in June 1843, he did so ranked 21st of 39 cadets in his class. Having finished at West Point, he was quickly appointed to the 4th Infantry Division and sent to St. Louis in the state of Missouri as a brevet second lieutenant. Grant seems to have been relatively uncommitted to a military career at this point and considered this a temporary posting, from which he might retire in a year or two. Yet it was a highly significant period in other ways. While at West Point, Grant had befriended Frederick Tracy Dent, a fellow cadet who was slightly older than Ulysses. Dent originally hailed from Whitehaven near St. Louis, and Grant became a regular visitor at the Dent household following his arrival in Missouri. He had soon struck up a relationship with Dent's sister, Julia, and in 1844 they were engaged. The union, though, would not be formalized into a marriage for another 4 years, as war on the southern border interrupted their plans in this regard. The war, which erupted in 1846, was the direct result of the contentious position of Texas between the United States and Mexico, traditionally part of Spain's colonial possessions in Central America. Texas had become part of Mexico when the country acquired independence from its mother country, Spain, in the early 1820s. However, Texas's position within the broader Mexican state was always contentious, and in 1836 it broke away into a new Republic of Texas. Thereafter, it gravitated towards the US, and when he was elected as president late in 1844, a major plank of James Polk's policy platform was expansion of the United States into Texas.
I'm going to do a video on James K. Polk sometime. Biographics has one, I think. I think you guys find it interesting. If you were interested, which you wouldn't be watching my channel if you weren't. So
This was duly accomplished in 1845 with the formal annexation of the Republic of Texas. However, Mexico was unwilling to accept this new dispensation. In particular, a boundary dispute arose over where the new border between the US and Mexico should lie.
Let's just imagine that we in America, Mexico comes and tells us, we're going to annex this state, this state, this state, this state, this state. Do you think we'd be cool with it? Of course we wouldn't. So I completely understand why they wouldn't be. It's not a shock. Oh, you're not cool with us taking land from you? I'll be honest, didn't expect that.
Polk's administration favoring the Rio Grande, and the Mexican government arguing that the frontier should be located along the more northerly Nueces River. These issues spilled over into war in 1846. Grant's role in the war was limited as a junior officer, but also formative in its own way, as he fought at the Battle of Palo Alto, the first major clash of the war, near Brownsville in Texas on the 8th of May 1846. It was also the first time Grant had seen active combat. He subsequently served as a regimental quartermaster further west towards California and then in Mexico itself in 1847. He earned a commendation.
He was a really good quartermaster as well.
For his role in the Battle of Molino del Rey, fought near Mexico City in September 1847. And so, while he did not have any major command during the US-Mexican War, it is increasingly viewed as an important period in his career as a military commander. It was between 1846 and 1848 that Grant gained his first experience of warfare, and it was to be the only war he fought in prior to the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, and as such, it must be considered his most active training period for the later conflict. Ultimately, the US-Mexican War ended in a total US victory. Having secured the border regions in the opening months of the conflict, General Winfield Scott advanced into Mexico itself in the spring of 1847, eventually occupying Mexico City, a campaign which Grant was involved in. The resulting Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo agreed in February 1848, saw Mexico acknowledge U.S. control over Texas, while the Rio Grande was established as the border between the two nations. Consequently, while the U.S. did not take the opportunity provided by its complete military victory to acquire further land from Mexico, the peace essentially consolidated its position in Texas and established the modern border between the two countries. In the aftermath of the U.S.
This was the ultimate survival food of our forefathers. Cooled and sewn into bison hide bags weighing 90 pounds, it was an extremely dense, high protein and high energy food. A single pound provided about 30.
Okay.
In the aftermath of the U.S.-Mexican War, Grant returned to St. Louis and married Julia Dent. Theirs was a close relationship, though initially it caused a rupture between Grant and his parents, who were discontented with the Dents being slave owners. Despite their family squabbling, which continued with varying degrees of intensity for decades to come, there is little doubting Ulysses and Julia's affection for one another. She had a cast in her left eye and squinted as a result of it, a characteristic which years later, when Ulysses became president, she considered having surgery to correct. He vetoed the idea, stating that he loved her just as she was. Evidently, it was Julia's liveliness and other character traits which made Ulysses devoted to her. Eventually, they would have 4 children, 3 boys, Frederick, Ulysses Jr., and Jesse, and a girl named Ellen. But Ulysses and Julia's early family life was repeatedly interrupted by Grant's military postings. In the years following the US-Mexican War, he was moved around several times to different military commands in Detroit and New York State. But it was finally to California that he was dispatched in the early 1850s. Gold had been discovered out on the west coast, and as settlement increased there around the middle of the century, a heightened military presence was needed. Julia was heavily pregnant at the time, and Grant was forced to leave her in the east, while he headed west. The next few years were a bleak period. Grant was moved around repeatedly across California and the Oregon Territory. In an effort to better support his young family back home, he entered into several business ventures on the side, each of which failed. Then he started drinking more heavily, the beginnings of a long acquaintance he would have with the bottle. And eventually it was repeated acts of drunkenness and the clashes these caused with his commanding officers which led him to resign from the military on the 31st of September 1854. Thus, at 32 years of age, and with no idea of what he might do henceforth, Grant headed back east to St. Louis to be reunited with his wife and family. Life outside the military, though, did not bring any relief from his hardships. As back in St. Louis, things went from bad to worse. Having accepted a farm allotment from Julia's father, he nevertheless continued to struggle financially, in part owing to an economic recession in the US in 1857. A venture into real estate proved abortive, and in the late 1850s, Grant was reduced to selling firewood on a St. Louis street corner to make some extra cash. And
through his life, the one thing that always follows him is the ability to manage money. You know, when you think he had something good, he got swindled. Yeah, he just
pawned a gold watch, a prized possession at one point. Years later, F. Scott Fitzgerald would state that there are no second acts in American life. He should perhaps have considered the highly successful second act of Ulysses S. Grant before making this assertion. In the early 1860s, Grant's life was to take a striking turn, brought about almost entirely by the crisis which enveloped America in the aftermath of the election of Abraham Lincoln as the 16th President of the United States in the presidential election of November 1860. Tensions had been brewing for decades between the free states in the north of the United States and the slave-owning states of the South. Now in 1860, Lincoln, though willing to compromise with the slave-owning states, was built into a bogeyman by the southern states, one who would seek to end slavery altogether in America. As a result, upon his election, the state of South Carolina seceded from the Union in December 1860. It was...
Okay. Lincoln's president. The secession has started. We're going to stop it here. The next one will carry out to 1 hour and 30, and then 1 hour 43, 1 hour 56, and we're done. So I'm going to end it here. This looks like a face right here looking at me, doesn't it? You guys see that, right? This isn't like a ring kind of thing. Okay, well, I'm just going to pretend like I'm not going to die and go ahead and end the video here before something bad happens. Like and subscribe. Gotta go. Bye-bye.